Good evening. So, when I run through a drive-through restaurant, just picking up dinner or a snack or something, I've noticed that I have this completely unreal expectation that from when I pull up and I order my food, I should be able to order, pull forward, pay for my food, and receive my food in less than 15 seconds. That's just what I expect. Again, completely unrealistic. And then if there's somebody in front of me that's taking too long to order, it drives me crazy. Can't handle it. And then I complain if the food's not hot or fresh. Completely unrealistic. Most everything we do in today's society revolves around doing things almost completely on impulse. There's no lag time. There's no waiting. It's all about instant gratification. Driving. Ugh. I have a lot of windshield time on my way to work and home every day. I'm very grateful that my employer has made it mandatory to complete a comprehensive defensive driving class. Without that, I'd probably be in trouble. Obviously, driving takes a lot of patience. Patience that I lack often. In fact, on the way here tonight. For those of us who have raised children or are raising children, one word tends to stand out more than most. I know that all of us have children that are perfect little angels all the time, right? Pause for laughter. But raising children requires a lot of patience. As mothers and fathers, we're given the responsibility to teach our children. We're given the responsibility to train our children, to discipline our children, to encourage our children, to love our children. And that takes a lot. And so then we get to a point in the child's life. So as the child is younger, typically it's a little bit easier to do these things and to be patient with them before they can talk back. So then we get to the point in the child's life where they want to be independent. They want to do things on their own. They want to learn and experience things, which is completely natural. But that requires an enormous amount of patience and something that I fail at daily. And so it's not just children, but things that we do on a daily basis. Like I said, going to work, driving, interacting with people. And each situation is different and requires varying amounts of patience. And I think we've all heard the quote, "Lord, give me patience and give it to me now," right? So if you haven't caught on yet, the theme for tonight is we're going to be talking about patience. Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law." And then in Galatians 6:9 it says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." So clearly, being a Christian is to be called to have a virtue of patience, to live a life that embodies the fruits of the Spirit. And we can't live up to its full potential without it. We're going to take a look at 5 men who chose to have an attitude of endurance and an attitude of patience, who were not willing to give up, but to be strong and courageous and willing to see how God was going to use them for his greater purpose. First, we're going to take a look at Abraham. So in Genesis chapter 12, the first 3 verses. "Now the Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.'" So basically, God's telling Abram to pack up his stuff and leave home. And if he does, then him and all the families on the earth are going to be blessed. That would be a pretty big motivator for me to follow that plan. In Genesis 15, starting in verse 1. I'm sorry, 15 and verse 15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord and counted it to him as righteousness. So Abraham's a little bit nervous, afraid that he's not going to have a son of his own. But God comes to him and tells him that he's going to have a son. He's essentially telling him to be patient. It's all about God's timing and not what we want. His plan is always greater and more expansive than what we as humans can comprehend. Skipping down to Genesis chapter 16, starting in verse 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So Abraham had a slight hiccup in his patience here. He had a son with Hagar. His name was Ishmael, and he was 86 years old when Hagar had Ishmael. But Ishmael was not the fulfillment of God's promise or blessings. So Genesis 17, starting in verse 6, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you, and I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. And I will give it to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And then in chapter 18, starting in verse 10, the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. So Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90 years old when they had Isaac. Abraham had to wait another 14 years after Ishmael was born before his son Isaac was born. The fulfillment of God's promise. Hebrews chapter 6, starting in verse 13, For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, Surely I will bless you and multiply you. And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. God delivered his promise to Abraham on his terms and his timing, regardless of what Abraham did. It's not always easy to be patient, and sometimes we'll fail. But if we have our end goal in mind, then it will certainly be easier to stay on that path, as long as we have God as our master. Another man we're going to look at is Joseph. So starting in Genesis chapter 37 and verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So as the younger of 11 brothers, Joseph was favored over all the others. Clearly his brothers were very jealous. They couldn't believe that they would, at some point in time, bow down to Joseph. So at 17 years old, he was lied to, betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, and left for dead. And then he was sold as a slave. Joseph was 30 years old when he was made an overseer. That means that he spent between 17 and 30, he spent 13 years either in Potiphar's house or in prison. Joseph was probably about 39 when his brothers make their first trip to Egypt during the second year of the famine. And then he's probably about 41 years old when the brothers come a second time with Jacob, his father. So Joseph waited for 24 years. He had to wait and endure many hardships and trials. And we know it couldn't have been easy for him. He was betrayed by his own family, left for dead, thrown in prison in a foreign land. But God's plan prevailed, and it took a lot of patience on Joseph's part to fully understand that. We can't talk about patience without talking about Job. So, starting in Job chapter 1 and verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. And then skipping down to verse 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house, and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So it's a very familiar story. We all know the story. Job loses his property. He loses all of his possessions. He loses his children. Satan attacks Job's health. His wife even tells him to curse God and kill himself. And then Job gets some bad advice from his friends, suggesting that it was something that Job had done to deserve all this. But despite everything that happened to Job, he never turned away from God, but he endured the hardships and presses on. Job was a patient man. God was teaching him a lesson, and he wanted him to understand that we may not comprehend or understand what God is doing in our lives, but that when we trust him and keep our faith by being patient, then we will be blessed. And so in the end, Job was blessed with twice as much as he had before he lost everything. In Luke chapter 2, it talks of a man named Simeon, starting in verse 25. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came in the Spirit into the temple. And when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, "Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to your people Israel. And his father and mother marveled at what was said about him. And Simeon blessed them, and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. So it says that he would not see death until he had seen Jesus. We don't know how long Simeon had to wait, but the indication here is that he waited for some time prior to being able to see Jesus. And so that required a lot of patience. And finally, the perfection of patience is found in Jesus. Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. So clearly, Jesus is our ultimate example of patience. He spent the majority of his life teaching and training his disciples to understand what was happening, about things that were happening and things that were going to happen. And the disciples, they just weren't getting it. It's almost similar to trying to teach little children. You have to explain it over and over, and then these guys still were not getting it. And then there's the miracles. Jesus healed lame men. He healed sick men. He drove out demons. He even brought back people from the dead. And they still didn't believe it. How frustrating that must have been to just have to constantly remind them and teach them the same things over and over. But Jesus was nothing but patient with them, and he loved them. Jesus grew up knowing that he had a greater purpose, and he knew that that path would end with his death. In the garden, he knew that he had to die. The human part of him certainly didn't want to, but he knew that God had a bigger plan, and that was part of the plan. So Abraham, Joseph, Job, Simeon, and Jesus were all men of patience, and they were given for us to learn from and imitate. To be a Christian requires sacrifices, taking off the old self and putting on the new. It's not always easy, and there will be times that it's really hard. Learning patience and understanding that God has a bigger and better plan than we can even know will help us to have peace and should encourage us to look toward the finish line, knowing that God is our master. There won't be anything we can't accomplish. Patience. I'm not very good at it. I'm going to try to be better. I have a feeling that having an attitude of godly patience is going to shine a very bright light to those that we come in contact with. And we'll finish with Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9 again. And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Hope you'll think about this as we stand and sing.
Kneel at the cross, Christ will meet you there. He intercedes for you. Lift